Although something terrible may occur to you in any of the statistically safest countries, there are areas on Earth where you should avoid if you want to enjoy a secure, peaceful life. The Institute for Economics and Peace is one of the most well-known sources of video. It is an international, nonpartisan think tank based in Sydney, Australia. The IEP focuses on peace as a measurable, tangible indicator of human flourishing and development. IEP, which is part of the Council on Foreign Relations, has been analyzing data for the past 15 years on nearly 24 variables linked to homicide and violent crime rates, political instability, violent demonstrations, weapons imports, and other factors. The annual Global Peace Index of the organization ranks countries based on their danger level. A position of the country on the index is not directly linked to violence, but being ranked among the 10 least peaceful countries almost always implies that a nation is involved in an ongoing conflict or has high levels of crime. In this video, we're going to explore the top 10 most dangerous countries to live in. But before we do that, do not forget to subscribe to our channel watch time. While this video may seem to suggest that you should never visit these locations, we do not mean to imply that you should avoid them entirely. Things can change as many persons have traveled to a variety of sites on travel watch lists and have had a wonderful time. Here is a list of the top 10 most dangerous countries to live in. Let us get started. Number 10. Russia. According to IEP study, unlike the other countries in the bottom 10 for peace, Russia did not have an internal armed conflict. Despite this, Russia saw one of the greatest increases in violent protests, with more than 8,500 people detained according to figures of IEP. According to IEP data, more than 8,500 people were arrested during these events. On the other hand, ordinary citizens who are not challenging the government do not see their nation as a threatening place to live. The percentage of people who feel very concerned about becoming a victim of violent crime is just 21%, and less than 10% has actually been assaulted. The fact that Russia is so highly militarized and has one of the highest per capita rates of weapons exports in the world contributes to its ranking on the list. Number 9. Democratic Republic of the Congo. According to the IEP study, violence reduced the gross domestic product of Central African Republic by 37% in 2020. President Faustin Archange Touadéra was running for re-election, alleging that his predecessor, François Bozize, had attempted a coup with rebel militias. On January 4, 2021, the National Elections Authority certified Mr. Touadéra as winner of the election. Despite a peace agreement between the government and 14 non-state armed groups in 2019, opponents of former President Bozize assaulted towns on December 2020, according to the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Around 20% of its population fled the violence and insecurity that surrounded the polls, fleeing into Cameroon, Chad, and the Congo Republic. Another 164,000 people are internally displaced. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is hit with numerous protests all over the country. These frequently turn violent, and the crime rate in the country is high, with armed home invasions, robberies, and assaults being the most severe crimes. Furthermore, police forces are under-resourced to combat crime. Number 8. Libya. Libya is a country in North Africa that is enduring some of the most severe civil violence in the world. It is unquestionably one of the top 10 nations of the world when it comes to the 10 most dangerous countries to live in. After Gaddafi was overthrown and murdered during the Arab Spring, Libya descended into anarchy. Libya has a long history of extremely high crime, civil unrest, kidnapping, armed conflict, and terrorism. Violence in Libya is mostly the result of militias fighting with one another. It is a country where various groups, militias, and terrorist organizations fight for control of the nation. As a result, it is an unsafe destination that has a crime rate of 62.27. A 15-month war between armed factions resulted in the deaths and disappearances of hundreds of civilians, as well as thousands of people fleeing their homes. The continuing civil unrest and political instability in Africa have remained a problem. According to polling conducted by IEP, nearly 45% of Libyans have experienced violence personally in the past 2 years, with more than 25% seeing violence as the biggest danger in their daily lives. The country is classified as having an extreme risk of illness and injury. Number 7. Central African Republic. Congo has been on the list for several years because of deteriorating ties with neighboring Zambia in 2020, when a territorial dispute resulted in military confrontations between the armed forces of two nations. Congo lost 9% of its GDP as a result of violence. Despite a peace agreement reached in 2017, chaos reigns in the African nation. The Seleka and anti-Balaka fighters continue to clash. Internally displaced persons number 620,000, as well as 570,000 refugees fleeing to neighboring nations due to the fighting. As of November 30, 2021, the U.S. State Department ranks Congo as a reconsider travel country, noting that violent crime, such as armed robbery, home invasion, and assault, is common and local police lack resources to respond effectively to serious crime. Assailants may pose as police or security agents. Number 6. Somalia. Somalia is another African nation to make it on the top 10 most dangerous countries to live in. Somalia has a high crime rate and significant political instability. The country faces issues including terrorism, civil unrest, and criminality. Various terrorist organizations, such as Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and ISIS have established themselves in Somalia. It is the site of a bloody battle between 18 U.S. Special Forces and a Somali troop of warlord in 1993, when it inspired Mark Bowden's book Black Hawk Down, a story of modern war, as well as the film adaptation. Somalia, though, is still a violent place today, more than 20 years after. In the midst of this unstable climate, the government has been unable to prevent crime and violence. The country is beset by a lack of police forces, severe droughts, and food shortages. It poses a high risk of kidnapping, with terror attacks on airports, government buildings, hotels, and restaurants being all too frequent. Militants have a propensity for targeting non-Muslims and just about any place else that people gather with car bombs, mortars, and suicide bombers. The conflict in South Sudan has resulted in the displacement of 20% of the population since an ongoing battle between government troops and Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group, began. 34.9% of its economy has been damaged due to violence. Number 5. Iraq. Since 2015, Iraq has been one of the 5 least peaceful countries in the world. According to IEP, death from terrorism declined after the defeat of ISIS. Although the U.S. State Department has issued a do not travel rating for Iraq and warns that U.S. citizens in Iraq are at high risk for violence and kidnapping. Internal and external conflicts exist in the country, including terrorist assaults by ISIS, who continue to capture and murder innocent people, as well as military personnel. Terrorist and insurgent organizations frequently target both Iraqi security forces and civilians. Sectarian militias opposed to the United States threaten American citizens and companies throughout Iraq. In many parts of the country, including Baghdad, IEDs are used. The government is rated highly for providing safe food and water, as well as constant electricity, by fewer than a third of Iraqis. Number 4. Yemen. According to IEP, Iran has been hurting in tranquility since 2008. Since 2015, a Saudi-led coalition and Iranian-backed Houthi militias have battled each other in a civil war that has resulted in the deaths of some 100,000 people. In addition to that, Yemen is increasingly plagued by violent crime. Over 13% of the population is made up of refugees or internally displaced persons. 51% of Yemenis feel less secure now than they did before. Yemen was ranked worst in the world for belief of its population that the government had done a poor job providing safe food and water and dependable electricity supply. The Yemeni civil war, which began in 2015 and has killed tens of thousands of people, continues despite the assertion of the United Nations that Yemen is facing the worst humanitarian disaster of the world. The battle has resulted in 4.3 million people becoming homeless and 14 million others at risk of starvation and deadly diseases as a result of the conflict. Number 3. South Sudan. The country has been ranked third in the list of the top 10 most dangerous countries to live in due to civil unrest, ongoing political conflicts, and widespread criminal activity, including robberies, assaults, carjackings, and kidnappings. There is practically no rule of law or order in South Sudan. The majority of violence between the government and opposition groups takes place in places like the capital city of Juba of South Sudan, where there is little to no rule of law and order. South Sudan separated from neighboring Sudan in 2011 and declared its own sovereign state. However, territory disputes between the two countries continue to fuel instability in South Sudan. According to the State Department, atrocities against civilians, including appalling levels of sexual violence, have forced 4 million people to flee their homes. According to study of Institute for Economics and Peace, found that violence reduced the GDP of South Sudan by 40%. Number 2. Syria. The country of Syria is beset by a high degree of political instability and criminality. Syria has the 10th highest crime rate in the world, with a rating of 67.42 when it comes to criminal activity. The Assad regime violently suppressed protests throughout the Arab Spring in 2011, plunging the nation into a full-blown civil war. The conflict has been dubbed as the second deadliest war of 21st century, where approximately 470,000 people have died, including 55,000 children. Years of civil strife have left the country scarred, with many factions controlling different areas of it. As a result, it is the operational ground for a number of terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Hezbollah, which are responsible for severe human rights violations, in addition to the Syrian government. According to many experts, Syria is the most dangerous country of the world. However, it stands in second number in the list of the most dangerous countries to live in. The election of President Bashar al-Assad in Syria has helped to improve the political stability of the country. Even so, the terrorist danger has grown in Syria, and the nation was hit by ISIS and Al-Qaeda attacks on a frequent basis throughout 2020. The economy of Syria sustained the most severe damage from conflict, losing 82% of its economic output as a result. The civil war has exacerbated an already critical humanitarian situation. The United Nations Refugee Agency, estimating that 5.5 million Syrians have fled their homeland since the fighting began, making it one of the biggest refugee situations in decades. Number 1. Afghanistan. For the 4th year in a row, Afghanistan has been named the least peaceful country, or the most dangerous country to live in on Earth. Before its Western-backed collapse of the government and the sudden takeover of Taliban fighters in the summer of 2021, it had the highest terrorism impact among all countries, even though both fatalities from internal conflict and violence have decreased recently. Since the rise to power of Taliban, very few people have been allowed to flee the country. According to Human Rights Watch, Taliban forces have killed former officials and ransacked houses of journalists, activists, and human rights defenders. The human rights of women are being threatened. Many women who were previously in powerful positions have been dismissed. Afghanistan is the most dangerous nation on Earth, with Taliban attacks resulting in a high number of fatalities. According to the UN peacekeeping mission in Afghanistan, Afghanistan has the highest rate of total war and terror-related deaths among any country. There were 3,804 civilian fatalities in conflict last year, 927 of which were children. According to the International Narcotics Control Strategy report of the State Department, the GDP of Afghanistan was reduced by 40% due to violence. In addition to military clashes, Afghanistan has significant crime issues. 13% of Afghans felt safe walking alone at night, and 50% said they had money or property stolen from them. Afghanistan, ranked at the very bottom of the ranking, will almost certainly be engaged in some form of open warfare, which means peace and quiet are problems for both residents and tourists. Well, this is the end of video. Do not forget to click the subscribe button and press the bell icon if you liked the video. Thank you for watching the video.